and I think it makes a mockery as well of religion to say that, imagine someone in the lab flicking through a Bible trying to make penicillin. It's just that people can tell you things, but whether it's worthwhile knowledge is very debatable.
Yeah.
Is a growth form of what we would commonly call fungus.
Who is
he's a human being to start with. So I'm from Ireland. So I came to Australia in 2012. So only 2 years ago, as I count years. So I'm a scientist. So I came here for work. So I am a lecturer at Western Sydney University. I teach microbiology, and before I came here, I was a full-time researcher in microbiology. So it's connected, but it was before I came here, I was on short contracts, and this was a permanent position. And when I was full-time researching, I had said to people, I will swim across an ocean for a permanent job. Okay. And I guess I had to. Well, you can't break a promise, right?
Yeah. So
I sent it out into the universe. So I had to. I didn't have to swim. Thankfully.
Yeah, you flew.
I flew. They were kind enough to buy me a one-way ticket.
That is good.
That was good. So
yeah.
That was the first job, because I'd moved around Europe a bit, and this was the first job where they paid for relocation. So that was quite nice.
Yeah, so I think they really like your work in the field of microbiology, I guess.
I'd like to think it's that, and not just their standard operating procedure for when they hire people from overseas. I'd like to think it was all me being amazing, but it is actually their standard.
Nah, you are, I think, come on, you're a doctor. You are already amazing.
It's everyone they hire into the same position as a doctor as well.
Yes, fair enough.
But it was, so that was, it was quite a big change in some ways, because I had done my PhD and my initial research work in the United Kingdom. So initially in England, and then in Scotland, and then I moved back to Ireland. And, so Australia is the biggest full move I've made. So it's quite far.
Yeah, it's quite far from home. And then you have lived in a couple of different places throughout your career. And then what do you think? Australia is better?
It's very similar. I guess historically, Ireland and Australia were former colonies of the British Empire. And since I lived in Britain, it's not a large culture shock. I mean, the handy thing is language. I mean, I guess it's good. Historically, maybe not so much, but in real terms, in the here and now, actually, growing up speaking English has been very useful. And so coming to Australia is not a huge culture shock.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's same in a way, because come on, it's British. We still
it's they still have the monarchy.
Yeah,
so culturally, like the modern nation of Australia is not massively different to going to live in parts of the United Kingdom. It's just got bigger spiders and sharks and snakes.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, we got those things moving around. I don't know if we got.
Yeah, that's when you're overseas. That's what everyone says. Oh, don't go to Australia. You'll die in 7 minutes.
Yeah.
But when you get here, everything leaves you alone.
Yeah, it's not. It's I think I was talking with one of my mates yesterday at work. As we are comparing United States and Australia. So in Australia, we got a lot of venomous snakes here. Like I think more than 20 in all around the world, right? And then we got spiders that you can, like tiny bit of spiders that can bite you and then you're gone. Those stuff, but in compared to US, we have another type of violence in US. So we are comparing that is stuff, and then it's.
I mean, I think what they say about dangerous, let's say we'll keep it to animals, dangerous animals in the US will hunt people. Bears and wolves will go looking for people.
Yeah.
Nothing over here really wants to hunt people.
Yeah. They got nothing to do with people.
Like, a spider doesn't want to eat you.
Nah.
It's just if you happen to encounter it.
Exactly.
It's more of an accident. I mean, maybe sharks will hunt you. But,
yeah, if you go into the territory, definitely.
Yeah, and maybe dingo will take a nibble. But they're not the same as a large brown bear.
Nah, it's not.
That will eat you in your car.
Yeah, you've seen those videos circulating where the bear will just come when you're having a picnic around in the park, and they're like, "Oh my god!"
They're very food motivated.
Yeah.
I guess the one secret that Australia keeps from the rest of the world, and you don't know about it until you get here, are magpies. Because they will hunt you, attack you, and carry you away.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I never knew about a magpie, and then one day I was watching a comedy show, and then there was this thing about a magpie. So I went and okay, so that's why they got the helmets with the spike.
Yeah, so not far from where we live at MacArthur Square, I saw a person getting attacked by a magpie. And then the magpie looked at me and came towards me as well. I had my umbrella with me, but apparently they remember you.
Oh, wow, okay.
And they remember the places, and, they keep a book, and I think they're used as debt collectors, maybe, I don't know. But they're probably the biggest, scariest thing that Australia doesn't tell the world about.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah, you don't feel scary, but once they attack you, then that's what it is.
Yeah, I think it's because nobody expects it.
Nah.
Like, we're more worried about looking at the ground for snakes.
Yeah, it's just a bird, right?
Yeah, it's just a little bird.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a beak.
They have a very strong one.
Yeah. But again, that hasn't been broadly communicated to the world.
We should get this out in the world.
We need that out there.
Yeah.
That if you do come to Australia, get a helmet, make sure it has sharp spikes on it, and you should be safe from magpies.
Fair enough. How did you become scientist? Like, was it you good academically when you were growing up?
It probably starts even earlier, and I probably have to blame television.
Okay.
Because David Attenborough television shows were really popular. I don't want to put my age on show, but like, let's say the late 70s, early 80s, when I was just little. It was, those shows were appointment viewing. I would always watch those. And just throughout my life, that was a constant. There was also Jacques Cousteau did those oceanographic television shows and looked at marine life, and I was really inspired by that. And I was really interested in dinosaurs, and I really wanted to be a marine biologist. So from maybe the age of 4 or 5, that was what I thought I wanted to do. So some people, maybe had other dreams. Maybe I should have been thinking about trying to play for Manchester United. Not a realistic goal, but actually I thought, I wanted to go and study sharks. So yeah, all, since the earliest point. And my mother and father were always very encouraging with academic, responsibilities. So for them, it was always important that their children went to school and did well at school, and that you don't go to school and waste your time there. So there's always a bit of parental pressure to maintain academic standards. Because I guess as children, we don't appreciate it. But one of the ways you can change your situation in life, rather than wanting to be a professional sports person, is that if you do well academically, then that is a career path. And a tried, trusted, reliable career path. So even though when we're children, I don't want to do my homework, I don't want to go to school today, you get kicked out the door and told to go to school.
Yeah.
But in the end, you get to travel the world.
Yeah.
And that's if you can get a career and know that you want to do something from an early age, you never really do a job. You just go through education, and in my case, I never really left university, so I don't know what the real world is like. But you never have that dread of, oh, I have to get up and go to work to pay the bills. You don't like, you go to work, you still got to get paid, but you actually enjoy it.
Yeah, being I think growing up, each of us, like now it's a different generation. It's the way they are like, nah, because I had a chat about this with one of my colleague here as well. So we're talking about how these people, they always look at Mark Zuckerberg and then Elon Musk and then Bill Gates, saying that, okay, they are the dropouts, and they think, but they don't understand that they were well educated in their own field, whatever they were doing. So they knew what they were doing. So they thought that they are getting less from the university, is according to them, right? But they don't understand. They say, oh, these people, they didn't go to uni, but they are still a billionaire. Like, it's not the case. They know what they're doing. Do you know what you're doing?
Yeah. So I guess one of the things you would say is like, how many people have the same story? You know about them because they're individuals.
Yes.
These are vanishingly rare people. But I guess, they say Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg were college dropouts. But they invented the field that they moved into.
Yeah.
Like in the 70s, computer science wasn't super well developed. In the 80s, so they were pioneers in the field. Nowadays, they hire people on the basis that the folks have gone to university and studied.
Exactly.
So you have a better chance of being abducted by aliens than you do of being Mark Zuckerberg
another Mark
or Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Right. I don't even know what the statistics are. Don't take my word for that.
Yeah.
But it's a very low probability that you will invent a whole field or that you will develop a company like PayPal and then move into Tesla and SpaceX. It's so rare that you would be that person, that it is much likelier that if you pursue education, that you will have a good career. You won't be a billionaire necessarily, but it won't matter. You'll be at a very good standard of living.
Yeah, getting degree, and so I did my degree from UTS, right? Yep. So we had our mates, we had our other friends, colleagues there. Even getting education, getting degree from university and getting degree from the college, they are completely different. You both go to the same interview. You have a chance of getting hired if you are from the university rather than the college. That's what we found. That's what I found, okay? So, and then we got another field, like back in Nepal when I talk with my younger generations, they are learning coding, they are learning everything, but they are not too well into degree and all those things. Okay, if you can make a living out of it, that's good, but getting a degree, that will be a plus point to you to get exposed outside. At least you know what you are doing, what you are getting yourself into. Knowledge is important. You can get knowledge from anywhere, from anyone, right? But I think
I would probably dispute that.
Okay.
In that people can tell you things, but whether it's worthwhile knowledge is very debatable.
Yeah.
And knowledge just doesn't come from anywhere. I would say, like, you want to apply a standard to the knowledge that you're acquiring, and as a scientist, that's why I would dispute it. Because the path to knowledge for us relies on objectivity, experimentation, research, and it has to be reliable, reproducible, actual knowledge. So you have to be careful that the person who's telling you something is actually telling you something worthwhile. So it's part of being critical. And I think one of the things that I find with a lot of students nowadays is they place a lot of emphasis on what they find in Google. Google, is an algorithm. It can show you nonsense. But if you really don't have a good educational foundation, it's very hard to be critical of what you're seeing and what you're encountering, because almost all information is available.
Yes.
Whether or not it's legitimate knowledge or worthwhile information is where education is important.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe a lot of people are, I don't need to go to university. I can access any knowledge or any information. It's your ability to determine what is actually useful, valid knowledge or information that you get. So it's often important to be careful about where you're getting your information. So that's why I would.
No. That's a good point, because I remember doing assignments at the uni. They always emphasize on do not go and do research. Google it. Go to the UTS library, and they'll give you a lot of links to the library, the research papers, and you go and make those as the base of your research and everything. Same when you have, I think the university and even the colleges, if they are of the good standard, they will help you to figure out which is the legitimate information, which is the fake one. As you say, like Google. Forget about Google.
That's the problem in the information age, is determining what is actually useful information. And so that's why that the university, they will help you and they will point you towards sources which at least have been reviewed or would be considered legitimate within
and
the
they are
field.
backed up by a lot of research and a lot of like, imagine you need to publish a paper. How much time and effort you give to publish that paper? You work non-stop to find other papers out there. You do your own research based on the real data and everything. You just don't go to Google and search. Like, it's there.
Yeah, exactly. It takes years.
Of course,
unfortunately, it takes a long time to produce in certain scientific fields. So in my field, it can take 2 or 3 years. And again, an article is not in isolation, as you say. It's based on research of what's in the field. So it is building on an existing field of study. So you know that the people who have put that together have done the work. They've actually built the expertise. Now, sometimes there are flawed papers, and there are papers where there is misconduct at work, but normally they're filtered out or they're found. People who do science are human as well. So some of them fall victim to pressures. And so luckily nowadays a lot of that is found. So there are groups like Retraction Watch who go and they look for, maybe false information, but it's a lot better than the chaos of just what appears in blogs or on the internet at large. I normally say AI has become similar to Googling as a student tool. AI is not necessarily reliable if you don't know your foundational knowledge. So for people who have trained in a field, AI is a really useful tool. Right? If you can do coding, you can use AI to help you to detect errors, or maybe it's something that should have been used yesterday with that Windows issue. But it can be used as a tool. If you're still learning your trade and you're using AI, it can be very hard to know if it's telling you the truth or not.
Yeah.
And it also makes up citations because it's not really intelligent. It's just an algorithm that's trying to give you what you asked it for.
Yeah.
So the quality of your prompt also determines what comes back. And
Now, the way when ChatGPT was introduced, everybody was like, okay, we're going to get this. But if you ask 10 people who are beginner on ChatGPT and ask them to type the same prompt in their own way, it will give 10 different answers. It will give 10 different outputs. Everything. Yeah, people need to know how to use AI in the right way as well. But if you don't know what is the right information, then you might be getting yourself into some deep...
Yeah, so that's the problem. That's why, even now you have to value education as much as possible, because
Yeah.
although like I was a child once as well, I know what it's like to want to be a grown-up tomorrow, and I don't want to have to work.
No.
But the reality is, if you don't put that work in to become educated, then you're going to get lost in the midst of all the information that's available.
Yeah, 100%.
And so, but I think it is confusing for a lot of young people these days, because they want to use these tools,
Yeah.
or they want to, it's like, I don't want to have to spend 12 hours writing an essay. I can tell the machine to do it for me, and then I can go and party, or whatever it is people do these days. But actually, it's better to put the time in while you're young and paying for it,
Yes.
and actually develop, your tools so that you can use tools later on to your best advantage.
Yeah, now people misuse those information. The way they write, I tried to write an essay, someone was saying, but it's not the way they write it. You can tell it's written by AI.
Yeah.
Even any little bit of information you type it. That's why you need to have a proper the academic knowledge will help you to, as we said, filter out what the good and well. You can use that say in the field of coding.
Yeah.
You can use that to know, okay, if there are any errors or anything, all those like that.
It's really good. Most people who do coding now find it very useful. It's like having a help, an assistant, to help you with it. Which is, I think, what it was designed for.
Yeah.
But if you train these things on just all available information, then, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out.
Yeah. It does.
It's not able to critically evaluate the information that it's going to give you. In which case, it's not actually
it's not
intelligent at all. So I think, although it looks like it can do things for you, I would say it's not at that point. Like, if you need to make letters or emails, like standard generic things, I think it's highly useful. It's also for some purposes, I have colleagues who might use it to start looking into the literature in the field, but they know what is nonsense. So again, if you know your stuff, then these tools can be very useful. If you don't, and you're trying to use it as a shortcut, that's where you can get into trouble.
Yeah, that's what it is. Now everybody has, whoever uses it, everything has its limitations and potential as well. So people need to know. That's why education is important. That's why being academic, having a good research and all those.
Education is important so that young people can realize their potential, and actually then these tools can expand their horizons. So yeah, just for me, like going through school and taking it seriously, hating a lot of it, but understanding I was there for a reason. Going to university, just going to everything, take it seriously. It's an investment in your future.
Definitely.
So what we see a lot of is, I guess COVID brought this on, is a lot of non-attendance at classes. My whole rule when I was at uni was just go to everything. Because you may not be paying attention, but you'll pick something up. But at least when it comes to studying, it's revision, right? If you see something for the first time, you're not revising. And that creates problems of their own. So at least if you see something and then you read it again, you're actually reinforcing. And that's a lot better for learning.
That's right.
So that was my thing. Just treat it a bit like a job, take it seriously, and it's an investment.
That's why you were doing great in your own field. And talking about a field, right? You did research about mold.
Yes.
Can I say that in a layman term?
Yep.
So what exactly is mold?
Right. So mold is a growth form of what we would commonly call a fungus. So there are two main types. You have yeasts and you have mold. So the yeasts are what we use for making bread, beer. They basically make Friday nights a lot better.
Yeah.
But they are single cells. And if you remember, like from basic biology, cells are little blocks that make up our bodies. When we talk about microorganisms, their whole body is just one cell. So with yeast, it's just one small cell. It will divide and make two cells and on and on. Molds are multicellular to an extent, so they create long branched filaments, but these are just one cell thick. So you can almost see them with the naked eye. You can see the filaments relatively easily. But you can also see when they grow on a surface, they'll be a lot like the bluish green molds that you see on oranges, which is normally penicillin producing mold. So and you would also know it from bread mold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these produce long filaments, and the filaments will grow into the bread or into the orange. And that's the advantage of that growth form, is that it can penetrate substances so it can extract more nutrients. Whereas yeasts are just stuck on the surface because they can't actually exert physical pressure to gain access to nutrients below the surface. And so molds are typically very successful organisms. But they're also the part of the fungus, which is the main body of the fungus, but it's the part we rarely see. So most people would be familiar with mushrooms. So mushrooms, if you think about them, are basically like the fruits or the flowers produced. But the mold and the filaments are underground. So you never see most of that. And so it's only when they're ready to spread their spores that you really see them. And even with things like bread molds or the mold on oranges, the color is from the spores. And so that's how they transmit. And so the spores are easily picked up by wind or can be kicked into the air by raindrops. And then once they're in an air current, they spread around the place until they land on something tasty. Then they germinate, and little filaments of mold will grow into the new surface.
That's quite. Yeah, we see mold. I think Australia, because this country is a lot more humid than other. We do have. We do see mold each and like we see it every day. We see it somewhere, like if you go to stations, train stations, or even at home. If you're not paying attention, then there are mold, and then it
So dark, damp conditions are usually perfect for mold. And as you say, every year everyone talks about this, about living in Australia, that the houses aren't built the right way to deal with this.
Yeah, I just had that. I just read that article a week ago.
Yeah, there's no double glazing. I mean, when I came here, I felt like I had to tell everyone that Australia is a paradise where it's summer every day. At the moment, it's a bit cold.
Yeah.
But again, if you have heating on, then you get condensation on the windows. Also means there's condensation elsewhere, and mold does grow. Within homes, that mold, if it is allowed to develop, can produce spores, and those spores you can breathe in. And some of us are allergic to those. So there are people who can't have penicillin type antibiotics because they're allergic and would have an anaphylactic shock. The spores, if they get into your body, you can have a similar response. Or they can just aggravate your immune system, so you have an allergic type response. So a bit like pollen from seeds, from plants. Sorry, not from seeds. Correct myself.
It's all right.
Pollen produced by plants, that can excite your immune system and cause an allergic response. And spores act in a very similar way. But also, as they grow, they can sometimes release toxins. So one of the reasons why it's a good idea not to eat moldy food is while the fungus is growing, it may release toxins into the food. Part of the reason they do that is to exclude other microorganisms, because they're like, this orange is mine, it's all mine, no one else can have it. That's their accent as well. They speak.
Okay.
no, they don't. Maybe they do speak.
I want to cut you there. So let's say a blueberry, right?
Yep.
It comes in a plastic container.
Yep.
If one blueberry has a mold, can we eat the rest of the other blueberries?
Potentially, it's a good idea to wash them.
Okay, just to wash.
Washing is enough. If it's showing signs that it's become very soft and squishy and there's obvious mold growth, don't eat those.
Okay, just chuck
But
it.
the ones that still are firm, intact, just wash them.
Yeah, because I have had that experience with woolies. I bought a couple of like strawberries and then I didn't take it when I was buying. Then when I bought here, then I was unpacking and I like, it's a mold. So the first time I went back and they told me, okay, I got the receipt, but did it happen here, or how long was
How long
it?
have you had them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is the question, and so nowadays I keep on checking, opening the thing. What about?
No, it's always good to check.
Okay. What about the bread? Is the same thing with the bread?
The bread's the same.
Okay.
If you get an unsliced piece of bread, then you want to make sure that you stay as far away from where the mold is as possible. The mold you can see is a bit like an iceberg.
Yeah.
It's just a tip. The rest of it's growing in, and it may be releasing toxins into that. So cereal toxins is a real problem in the food industry. You'll have molds growing on grains. They'll produce toxins. Those toxins then get transmitted into the food. A lot of people like to talk about organic foods, but they're most prone to this type of intoxication because chemicals haven't been used to kill off the molds. So although organic is good, I'm not saying it's bad, but one of the reasons why you can have problems with it is because you're not killing off pathogens by using chemical agents. So it's probably worse for your health than any chemicals that were put on it in the first place. So once you critically evaluate things, you can see they're not always exactly as sold. But molds generally, when I was talking about oranges, is where they try to make sure no one else grows near them. That's how they discovered penicillin. So Alexander Fleming, not my favorite person because he discovered it by accident and now no one else can make an easy discovery. He's Nobel Prize for the low-hanging fruit. But no, that was just professional jealousy. He had bacteria growing on a plate and then some spores from an orange peel basically landed. And what he saw was there was this zone around the mold that grew on the plate where none of the bacteria grew. And so what the fungi and the bacteria do naturally is they try to, make sure the resources they guard resources for themselves. So they produce chemicals that can prevent the growth of other microorganisms. And so there's always this bit of chemical warfare going on. So what he discovered was this chemical warfare. And it turned out penicillin, just by chance, is amazingly good. So he found almost the golden bullet at the first without trying.
Yeah.
But one of the good things about penicillin is people could take it and it doesn't have a high toxicity to humans. It's very good at killing bacteria. It doesn't cause many problems for us. So it was really good. The problem is that in any arms race, your weapon's only good until the opposite side find a way to combat it or a defense.
Yep.
And so this has been the constant problem with the development of antibiotic resistance, where just standard penicillin isn't really used anymore because most organisms or most pathogenic microbes that cause infection will be reasonably resistant to it.
Okay.
Through exposure. So it's actually it's a really good demonstration of natural selection. in action, that if you expose a population to an antibiotic that can kill them, over time, mutants in that population will show increased resistance.
Yes.
Until the whole population is resistant. And the originals that were sensitive will be gone. And then you have this population that are very difficult to treat.
Yeah, fair enough.
But back to molds. So when they're growing, they do release toxic compounds into the area where they grow. And that's how they make sure no one else can steal their food. Hopefully, that's not what your children do at the dinner table. In which case, they'd be just shooting people around them.
Yeah. Nah, mold. Yeah, it's a big thing. And growing when we moved to Australia, we stayed in a place where there was no proper sunlight and everything. Then I don't know. I didn't encounter mold back when I was growing up as a kid back in Nepal, because I think most of our rooms, most of our houses, they are well ventilated and
the building materials stay dry.
Yes,
and that's most important.
Yeah, we didn't have this kind of houses. We got all brick houses.
Yeah. So I mean, back in Ireland, lots of houses would have mold problems as well. More because it rains all the time, and it's very hard for places to dry out. So I think that's more common maybe in areas where there's, issues with heating, etc. Maybe places that are poorer, very old houses, where they don't have double glazing and, it's not really been designed very well. There is mold growth. So in a wet climate, it's even more important to make sure everything is kept dry. If you can get sunlight, which we don't really have much of back there, into the house, then that's great.
Yeah.
So, but actually, sometimes these cultural practices you were talking about, there's a really good reason for doing them.
Yes. There's like now I'm trying to get into all of these stuff. I'm doing my own research and everything now, and then I realize it's somehow backed up by scientific evidence as well. But back in those days, the Western culture, the Western research were not that accessible. Like we're talking about ages ago, right? So, but they did in a certain way. They were expertise on their own field. Yeah. So that's somehow it matters. Yeah, but I remember if you used to open the closet, there used to be a big I don't know what you call those, but not like the wardrobe here. It's like the two doors you open up. Then it used to be stuffy. Yeah. Sometimes if you don't take the clothes out and everything, I remember. But here, it has to be like encounter my whole leather jacket. Yeah. Mold.
Oh yeah, that happens. Yeah.
I just stuck it, and then I had 2 weeks. I think I got something. It was bad. It was like a flu stuff. Yeah. So I didn't take that seriously because I didn't know how to handle that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen leather products growing molds before. Again, that's just moisture and humidity building up, because obviously leather's a natural product.
Yeah.
So there's something there to be eaten by microorganisms. Yeah. So part of the reason why microbes can cause infection, etc., is because they're mainly decomposers. So anything that's died in the environment would be decomposed eventually. And so it's that little switch between decomposing a dead animal and actually starting that process early while they're still alive. And, it's a little bit of a switch. Yeah. There's a few little factors that need to change, but effectively the same mechanisms work. Like a microbe that can degrade leather can probably cause a skin infection because it's a very comparable set of skills needed to do both. The difference is that to cause the infection, it has to have some ability to overcome parts of the immune system. So that's the main reason we're not sick all the time, is we have an immune system. And the reason why you don't have to panic about mold. So, if you've watched The Last of Us, it's good science fiction, but it's not something you need to worry about. is that our immune system is extremely effective at dealing with mold and fungal spores and many bacterial infections. So for the most part, we inhale spores every day. You know, some of it's pollen, some of it's fungal mold spores. Your immune system is able to deal with that very well. You might inhale up to 1,000 spores a day, which sounds like a lot, but they're very small. And your what's called innate immune system, so that's the one that doesn't need to require a new response, is set up very well to deal with that. So your innate immune system is the part of your immune system that doesn't produce antibodies. So it's not adapting to a new infection. It's the one that basically knows about existing threats. And if it sees them, it deals with them really quickly. And so molds are well known to our bodies. And so it can deal with them very well. The problems come in when, let's say, our body reacts to the mold spore thinking a protein on the mold spore is something that has to be really attacked, and that can cause an allergic response, a bit like what you would get to pollen. And so that's where people sort of get a hay fever type reaction, but not necessarily infection, which is ideal, you know, because you can take antihistamines for something. The issues with mold infection come along when people have pre-existing conditions. So the mold that I did most of my work on is called Aspergillus fumigatus. So this is a very common organism. It's usually found in the environment, you know, decomposing plants. You know, you can find it in hay bales. It lives in these types of places. So it doesn't sound like it should be very dangerous. But when you inhale those spores normally, and we inhale them every day, it's found all over the world. It's not a problem because we can deal with it. In some people, it will activate an allergic response, or they'll have an asthma-like response. But that's usually the extent of it. However, I was studying people who had been immunosuppressed to allow for transplantation. So when people are having a solid organ transplant, or maybe stem cell transplant for treatment of leukemia, you know, which is slightly different, where you need to get bone marrow transplants and have, you know, new immune cells in your body.
Yep.
What you have to do before transplant is you have to suppress the immune system in the person so that they don't reject the transplanted organs. And at that point, they're very vulnerable. A lot of the time, these people, you need to give them antibiotics to prevent any bacterial infections. And sometimes they may develop in lung infections caused by mold spores. And so Aspergillus fumigatus is very good at causing infections in this part of the population. So people are being treated for transplants. In those people, a particular group of white blood cells gets knocked out. So these are the neutrophils, and they're a very important part of your innate immune system. So they really go to the front line and deal with mold spores. So when they're not there, you're left with the reserves. You know, the guys that come off the bench, they don't play every week.
Yeah.
You know, you're worried about how much game time they've had. And they can't always do the job. And so in those cases, the spores are very small. They can end up in the alveoli, which are the really small sacs in the lungs. In there, the mold can germinate. And because it's a mold, it has these filaments. And those filaments can cross the alveolar wall so they can grow through the meat of your lungs into the bloodstream. And there, parts of their filaments can break off. Every part of the filament that breaks off acts like a spore and can grow a new mold. And so then they can become disseminated through the body. And I have seen cases of people who have had kidney infections, lung infections, Liver infections, the most dangerous is brain infection, which would be called cerebral aspergillosis. So that usually has a 90% or more mortality rate.
Rate. Wow.
So once it disseminates that far, it's very difficult to deal with. And it's also because the brain is fairly protected, it can be very hard to get drugs into that area because of the blood-brain barrier. So it can be hard to get enough of a dose of drug in there to be effective. So this is where those molds become problematic, is in groups of people whose immune system has been suppressed. In the 1980s, where people had developed full AIDS, their immune system becomes compromised. And in the 1980s, a lot of people died because of fungal infections caused by Candida albicans. And so it commonly causes a mucosal infection, which is commonly called thrush, right, which you can get in the mouth or around the genitals.
Yeah.
And normally it's not too serious. It's usually superficial, but it can actually change from a yeast into a filamentous form. And that's when it becomes very dangerous. So it was characteristic of people with AIDS in around the 1980s. Treatments have improved and changed so that that is not seen as much, but they actually see a different fungus called pneumocystis, and that is quite characteristic in those people, and cryptococcus as well. So they're what are called immunocompromised because an infection or pre-existing condition has disrupted their immune system. So immunosuppressed is where you've had your immune system knocked down because you need a medical procedure. And normally the immunosuppressed are kept in conditions where hopefully they're not going to be exposed to many pathogens. But people who may be immunocompromised may be in the community, and so they will be more exposed. And so you can get quite high rates of serious infection in those individuals. But we've also noticed because anything that disrupts your lung function can actually allow mold spores to germinate and develop. So having people who have had TB and have maybe lung cavities because of it have a higher chance of developing some of these mold infections in the lung because there's a place for the mold to hide and develop. Sometimes with people who smoke, because that can disrupt how well your lungs clear out impurities. So there's a thing called the mucociliary escalator where dust and spores are trapped in mucus, and then there are these cells which act as a conveyor belt to send all that mucus with spores in it, and you kind of swallow that or spit it out. But smoking tends to disrupt that so that things stay in your lungs longer than they would be. And so you can have the development of infections. So what we found as well, one of the articles I sent you was a recent one I worked on, which was looking at the incidence of fungal infections in people who had had COVID-19.
Yeah.
And it turns out that COVID-19 can disrupt your immune system. So having primary and secondary infections is a well-established phenomenon. And a lot of these fungal infections are secondary infections, so they're kind of hanging around waiting for an opportunity. And so it turns out that COVID-19 is very stressful on the immune system. And it makes it very difficult for you then to fight off another infection. So in parts of India, there was what's called a black mold. It's just because it produces dark spores. That was causing a large number of infections. And it was actually, we looked at articles from across the world and found out it was quite a wide variety of fungal species that were causing infections. And one of them was the one I'm interested in, which is Aspergillus fumigatus, was occurring in individuals who had had COVID-19. So I guess one of the interesting things that they were finding was a phenomenon called immune exhaustion. So the immune system's basically not infinite. And those cells of your immune system they need glucose, they need goodies. If they're busy, they get tired.
Yeah.
And then there's less they can do. But also, it can lead to signaling in your immune system being disrupted so that it's not coordinated as well as it should be. So it turns out that COVID's actually quite sinister.
Yeah, we heard that. We heard the cases where, like, they have had COVID and they thought they got out of it, and then like a year later they are still problem. They got respiratory problems and everything. They are still not 100%.
Yeah.
I think even when I got COVID, I was in bed for 4 days, and I think we got COVID at the end of the COVID. So my wife was like, oh, this time, because she works in the aged care, right? So she had a high chance to, and then she was pregnant, and we had a huge thing when she comes home. She always goes into the shower and wash everything, like so. And then we were kind of scared as well because we were having a first baby at that time, and then my wife was, after we came here, oh, we didn't get a COVID. Guess what? I got COVID the next day.
It finds everyone eventually.
Yeah, like how? Yeah, it just doesn't, like, no matter how much precautions you do, whatever you do, right? We are wearing masks, we sanitize everything, but it's still. I don't know how we got it, but yeah.
I mean, some of the early predictions were that COVID would become a lot like flu, that we would have a COVID season, and I think that's happened this year.
Yep.
But what actually happened over COVID, because of a lot of the social distancing elements, it was really good at preventing people from developing influenza as well. But as people went back out into the community, it was seen that there was an increased rate of flu infections, but also other viruses like respiratory syncytial virus or RSV, which was normally seen in children and the elderly.
Both of them go out.
Yeah, so that's seen a rise. But also, COVID's part of the mix. So I had COVID just recovered from it last week. It's not really going to go away. So it's going to be probably a lot like influenza in that it will change every year. And you'll probably need to get a jab if you're in an at-risk group. So if you have, let's say, pre-existing respiratory conditions, probably just be like getting a flu jab. But yeah, so it changes with time. Like the first strain is quite different to the most recent strain. And once it becomes prevalent in the community at a high enough rate, it's actually more transmissible than something like flu.
Yeah,
and so it's a bit easier to catch.
Yeah, I think this time it took a toll on both of our kids. The first one, she started a daycare, and then she had it, and then it just one after another one. So RSV, then influenza, then we got like a common cold rhinovirus. That's around. Yeah. So this Aspergillus fumigatus, where do you find it normally?
Just in your garden. In the woods, in the fields, in the environment. As I said, it's normally found in decomposing plant matter. So if you're making hay out in the fields, that's a perfect place to find it. It turns out that growing up in a field is ideal training for causing infection in people, which is kind of strange, but there is a reason for that. So at the center of hay bales, I don't know if you see this, or at large piles, on cold days you might see steam rising because it gets quite warm. And so that's a really nice environment for the Aspergillus fumigatus, or Aspergillus, it is also called. Nobody can quite agree on how to pronounce any of these things. But it grows quite well. But it also has to compete for resources with other organisms. And so in the environment, a lot of bacteria and fungi are preyed upon by protozoa. So amoeba type organisms will come along and they'll go, haha, I'm going to eat you, bacteria, or I'm going to eat you, fungus. And so you have to develop a defense against that, or you're just not going to do well. It turns out that's very good practice for when you're attacked by cells of the immune system. So they can grow at a temperature like human body temperature, about 37 degrees centigrade. They have some experience of dealing with competing microorganisms that resemble the immune system. So you're building up a training course. And also what happens is in farming, they actually do use some antifungal agents to prevent crop disease, which means that these other fungi, which don't cause crop disease, are also exposed. So they're developing resistance in the environment. And so when they produce spores and these spores get in the airways and they somehow infect a person who's immunosuppressed, then they are very well prepared to cause infection because those key cells of the immune system and maybe key elements of the immune system aren't working properly. So now you're just 37 degrees, not well protected, and full of yummy nutrients without lots of other bacteria and fungi to compete against. So again, with a lot of these infections, it's not personal. They're just trying to get by.
Yeah.
Not trying to make them seem fluffy and cuddly. But that's all it is. They just land in a new place. They don't know you're a person. You're just nutrients, right? Or a place they can live. And where they grew up has helped them to be quite well prepared to act as pathogens within a person. So it turns out we're not that different to a hay bale in some regards.
Yeah, so this if the temperature is pretty much same and they are already building a resistance and they are like, okay, this is my normal place of place to live.
Or like I have built some skills.
Yeah.
They're Liam Neeson in Taken.
Yeah.
I have a certain set of skills, right? Which I can use in this place. So so the environment provides opportunities. It's like Legionnaire's disease. There's this bacterium. It's called Legionella, oddly enough, causes Legionnaire's disease. Which came first, the name or the organism? But what's interesting about that is there are some outbreaks in Sydney, and it will grow in amoebae or amoeba-like organisms that may be present in air conditioning systems. Because they grow inside amoeba, they can live inside of your immune cells, and that's where they want to be. So once your immune cell takes it up, it's like, great, this is my happy place. This is where I want to live and reproduce. And that's, they've trained in the environment, not specifically with a view, but that set of circumstances have given them adaptations, which makes them a very effective pathogen. And so when they encounter humans, they're very well adapted to causing infection. So Legionnaire's is quite serious respiratory issue. Normally starts in air conditioning systems, but periodically there are outbreaks. If there are faults in air conditioning systems and there's buildup of moisture in them, then, depending on the type of filter, organisms could start growing, in which case you're just firing spores and cells around the place, and then people can inhale them, which is why it's important to take care of air conditioners, make sure they're not blocked, make sure that the filters are working, or, you have to take care of those systems.
Usually there's the old air conditions, like...
I think it can be new ones if they're not properly maintained.
Yeah, you clean the filter anyway.
Yeah, and it can depend on the types of filters. So there are some filters which are high efficiency, particulate filters, but there can be lower efficiency ones as well. And those can let through larger particles or smaller. So in hospitals, they'll have the high efficiency filters, which will be able to usually filter out spores. So it was thought of as a bit of a mystery why people in hospitals were developing fungal lung infections, because you would have these patients who were ready for transplant and are kept in rooms, and they had really good filtration on the aircon, and like, where are the spores coming from? Well, these people had been alive outside, and so they think it was a Trojan horse effect, that some of the spores were already in their lungs, and so when they became immunosuppressed, then they could develop, because it turns out you don't necessarily kill them all immediately. like some may survive within macrophage type immune cells, or they may survive hidden in some mucus, or they haven't been cleared. And so when the opportunity presents itself, they're present. So that was interesting. And so in some cases, they will give people anti-mold drugs just before they start their regime to become immunosuppressed.
Wow.
But that varies because those drugs can be quite taxing on the person. So in the old days, there was a type of drug called amphotericin B, and that was pretty bad for the kidneys. So you can't really give a high dose for a long period. So they like to use those types of drugs in a more effective fashion, make sure that people are presenting with symptoms before they start utilizing drugs or combinations of drugs. Because obviously the people are being treated for a very serious primary condition. You don't want the drugs to do additional damage. But so that is one option, but it's not a universal option.
So the air conditioned filter, how often do you think we need to clean it or check?
I'm not an expert on that. So, since this is going out, I just know they need to be properly maintained.
Yeah.
Whatever
I tried. I cleaned it. I clean it every couple of months.
Okay, that's
our one. Our one is a big one.
It's we're neighbors. We live in similar style houses. So,
and it's not that hard to clean. I found it's quite easy to just bring it out and just clean it, and then.
Yeah, I just went with when the warning showed up on the display.
There can be mold. There can be fungus in everywhere.
Everywhere, which is why I think it's. Some of these TV shows, video games are very compelling because you can make a case that this is a secret killer lurking everywhere. But for the most part, these organisms haven't adapted to be specific pathogens of humans. So they're usually secondary pathogens or just opportunistic. And normally the worst that will happen is you'll have something like hay fever. If you do have an immunosuppressive disorder, that's when problems really kick in because then they can actually cause true infectious disease in a person. But there are probably only a handful of fungi across the world that can act as primary serious infections. I mean, the most common fungal infection is probably dandruff, or maybe just skin infection. And that's about as bad as it gets because they can't survive at the, Australians won't think it high, but the high temperature inside the human body, 37 degrees, it's really bad for most microorganisms. So most of the fungi that cause skin infections can't survive. So that's why they're restricted. And the immune system deals with them. So for the most part, they're just causing problems on the surface of the skin. And when they kind of become red, that's the inflammation of your immune system coming to deal with them. The only problem is they produce a lot of spores. And so you really do have to take a bit of care to get rid of them. But that's going to be most people's experience, will be something like thrush, athlete's foot, dandruff. Those are very common. So it does show you that some fungi quite well adapted. But in terms of really serious life-threatening infection, that requires a very significant primary infection or you to have a really major problem like needing a transplant before that this can become really dangerous. So the situation where a fungus is going to be inhaled, take over your mind and make you bite someone's head off isn't very realistic at the moment.
Yeah, fair enough.
But the main risk with some of these is a common fungus becoming drug resistant and then being very difficult to treat. So Staphylococcus aureus was not a major problem. So golden staph, it could be treated with antibiotics. It wasn't too bad, but then it started becoming resistant to all the antibiotics. So then you're left with something you can't really treat. And the real problem is actually running out of antibiotics or antifungal agents. So if you run out of things to treat what should normally be a mild infection, then it kind of puts us back to sort of the 1800s, before we had these really good treatments. And then death due to infectious disease was much more common.
The streptococcus is the one with the...
In the throat.
The strep throat and all those,
Yeah, so that's less commonly antibiotic resistant. It's not nice. The staphylococcus, which looks almost identical, is a common fungus found in, the nasal passage. It can be found, in lots of places. It often causes skin infections or will infect a cut or a burn. When it's drug resistant, those can become life-threatening, which is a really different situation to maybe before it became drug resistant. And as I was mentioning, things like transplants, they require effective antimicrobial agents. So if you don't have antibiotics and antifungals, then a lot of invasive surgery becomes very risky because the chance of infection becomes massively increased. So that's probably the scary element is it's not killer fungi, it's running out of its resistant microorganisms.
Yeah, mutant.
Yeah, well, everything mutates.
Yeah, 100%.
It's, that allows for natural selection. So if nothing changed, none of us would be here.
Yeah, fair enough. It's how it is. What do you think? So we talk a lot about fungal infection, and so it really takes a toll on people with who are immunocompromised and who got their pre-existing conditions for us normal. So, if you want to say, okay, we need to know one thing about fungal infection, what would that be?
The one thing you want to know, especially in people like that, is when the infection starts. Because early treatment has been shown to be extremely effective. And a lot of the work I did was on diagnosis of infection. And actually, it can be very tricky. It's a bit like hunting a needle in a haystack, because a lot of the initial symptoms look a lot like a bacterial infection. So people have a temperature, coughing, etc. So the thing is, they'll normally be prescribed antibiotics. Antibiotics don't work on fungi. So then the infection can develop. And a lot of the time, because they're opportunistic infections, they don't always have very characteristic signs, and they're inside the body. So if you have something like thrush, you'll see it because you have these little presentation on the mucus, or you'll know when you have the characteristic, red ring on your skin if you have, let's say a skin infection. It's much less easy to know if it's inside the body, what's happening. So we would use PCR, which you may remember is how people were detecting COVID.
Yeah.
So we were trying to use PCR-based testing. But it's not present in the bloodstream or in the saliva in the same way that COVID is, and certainly not in high numbers. So actually being able to detect infection early enough is very difficult. So the one thing we would like to know is just when that infection starts so that you can implement the treatments, because at the moment, treatments are pretty effective.
Okay.
So the real thing is just knowing when someone's actually
if it's just a normal infection or all those.
If you could just say really early that person has specific infection X, and then you could treat it.
So you already said that you are not expert on the mold and how to clean the aircon filter anyway. But have you noticed? Have you noticed? Sometimes, especially when we use a lot of water on the, like sink where we put the what do you call it? Anyways, we put where there's a lot of water. There's like a black pores. Those are mold as well, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of the time. So moisture is absolutely essential for mold growth. So dry conditions, they hate. They're not good with it. They wish everywhere was rainy. But yeah, anything that's left wet and has any sort of nutrients that can be harvested, some microbe is going to try to grow on it. So again, that silicon seal.
Yeah, silicon seal.
Mold will grow on that because there's something there to be eaten, right? It's the right conditions. Or maybe a film of bacteria or something has grown and then friends come in and join it. Or, so just anything, clothing that's made from natural fibers, things will grow in it. Because in the environment, the job of the microbes is to degrade and decompose everything so that we're not up to our knees in, dead animals and plants. Decomposition's super important. So effectively, they're just carrying out a natural process. So if you add moisture to natural products, wools, materials, sponges, they come from somewhere, things will grow. So it's basically preventing moisture ingress into a lot of things like the table. Hopefully it's wood. This can, if it's not treated, if you let it get damp, something will start growing on it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the wood. And I had a issue with that one as well before, when I didn't know about anything. What are these black things coming out? So,
but in terms of taking care of that, a lot of the general household rules, like most bleaches, if it hasn't gone in deep into the fibers and that, a bleach will kill most mold. So it's really good around the bathrooms and that, or these mold killing agents, they work very well. So I don't know particularly the specifics for air conditioning filters. But if it happens to be around your bathroom or that, bleach is good, aeration, and those will take care of it. But you need to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
And make sure you're really have a good routine, especially if you live in a place where you've noticed that you're having an issue, maybe Australian homes in winter, it can be problematic.
It's windy, it's cold, and it started a little bit early as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, these conditions don't necessarily mean that anything specific, with regard to infections. I mean, we've had a bad period where we've had a lot of these viral infections in the community. So obviously with bad weather, people stay indoors more, which means there's more chance for transmission. So it's better if everyone's out by the beach and it's you get less transmission of these types of infections. So I think it's been a lot more like a traditional European winter in some ways, and that it's been windy, rainy, cold, so people haven't been outdoors as much. And I think that's been leading to some more of or they're like, well, we can't go to the beach, so we'll all meet at, Sarhad's house or some for a party. But
yeah, we need to do that one. I need to call all of our relatives, and we need the neighbors, and we need to hang out. I think we need to introduce a couple of new as well.
Yeah.
So
We've had some new people here on Ramsey Street.
Yeah. We have to figure that out. And enough about the mold. I think the fungus. So what do you do, except your one research and thing? What do Dr. Charles like to do?
So a lot of my life is spent at work. Because I'm a lecturer, so I don't just get to do research, I have to teach. So a lot of my time is spent doing marking, which is the worst thing in the world in some ways, where you have to read the same thing. 200 versions of the same thing can be, I think anyone in teaching, if they watch this, understands the unique pain of that. There's also a lot of administration. The School of Science has maybe 3,000 or 4,000 students, and so I'm involved in the administrative group for that. also trying to write research papers. I supervise PhD students and master's students. And so through all of that, it is very time consuming. Outside of that, and it's probably, I don't know if it's obvious yet, I'm a bit of a nerd. So I will watch almost any science fiction or real science documentary that is around. So yeah, a bit of gaming goes on because, if you're born in the mid-70s and you're from the first generation of legit gamers to all those young people who think they invented gaming. I'm really bad at gaming, but I do enjoy it. So I'm not, I can't go pro.
Okay.
Actually, I don't even like going on online gaming. There's some 4-year-old who's just going to snipe you when you. I don't need that in my life.
Yeah, I never like online gaming as well. I'm more of the GTA and COD and FIFA kind of guy.
Real life skills.
No, GTA.
That's your big black beast of a car is your GTA.
Yeah,
mobile.
no, GTA. Someone introduced me when I was really young, and the GTA Vice City, and then it felt amazing. It's not like there are good missions and everything, but you get to drive, you get to ride the motorbike. When you're a kid, that gives you that adrenaline rush. Yeah, probably not the best for kids. GTA.
No,
it's not. It's a lot of violence and everything, but yeah. Other than that, I'm more of the COD, FIFA.
Yeah. FIFA, it's not even FIFA anymore, is it?
No, they changed.
It's a sad day.
Yeah, they changed it. Yeah,
how dare they?
I'm still old school anyway. Yeah. So yeah.
Actually, strangely enough, I always quite like John Madden's NFL game. I was playing that since the 90s. So and I've had about 30 years of Doom. So I'm still playing Doom games. So, and Halo, it's kind of, so I'm a bit old, bit of an FPS, fan. I'm really bad in terms of hobbies. I always find that I should read things, but I spend all my day reading. My eyes are pretty old and tired, but I find Audible's really good. So that kind of keeps me up to date, and I'm such a nerd. I have just finished 60-book series in Warhammer called the Horus Heresy.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if anyone in your audience are Warhammer fans, but I don't play the game, but I think the stories are a bit of fun. But the Horus Heresy series, 60 books, got very repetitive after a while. It's not quality writing, but it's fun. It's just sci-fi stories.
No, it's fun to watch. Remember those Star Trek, the old ones, where the CGI was really bad.
I was old enough to remember when there was Betamax and VHS were at war. And I guess the interesting thing is a lot of people who have made collections, and you get to a point where you've moved home enough and moved country enough, or you no longer have a VCR, you don't have a DVD player, you don't have a Blu-ray, so you've lost all of your collections. But I guess it's really good. You can get all digital versions, but I think in some ways there's too much choice nowadays. Once upon a time, everyone would watch the favorite TV show on Friday at 8 p.m. Maybe not Friday at 8 p.m., but Thursday at 8 p.m. because Friday nights were for drinking. But Thursday night, and everyone would talk about it at work the next day. Yeah. I think I think Game of Thrones took that place for a while.
Yeah, until the last season came out.
Yeah, but you don't really have that kind of social focus towards viewing anymore because every taste is catered for, so it can be hard to find other people who are even vaguely interested in talking about Warhammer. And, was Horus a real villain or maybe partially a hero in the end? You have to find a very specific group of people. Yeah. I guess that's why the internet's good. And I guess I always said it's the best thing about the internet. Allowing people to connect with each other is also the worst thing about the internet. Yeah. Because it kind of amplifies or allows people with crazy ideas to talk to each other, but it allows fans to get together and talk about
it's
what they
absolutely
like.
you're absolutely right. The one thing I always enjoy about going on the internet is Reddit.
Yeah,
I like Reddit because you can find any answers. There are people out there who are expert, and I think that's the only question that's the unique question.
Yeah.
When I type in, forget about it. There are 1,000 people, same problem, same thing, and there is answer over there. I really like when people engage all over the world, like they engage on the Reddit. I really find Reddit.
I think you can always find someone who's got a very similar set of interests. And I found it fascinating when I became a professional, did a lot of teaching. You sort of meet the same group of people every year. They're totally different. They're different humans. They have different names, but they're the same archetype. And so each one of them thinks they're unique and fantastic.
Yeah.
It turns out we're all just cookie cutters. It's like you have, your goth group, you have your metalheads, you have your jocks. These people all just appear every generation. So I guess in some way that means you'll always have a group somewhere, and the internet can allow you to connect, but it also just reminds you most things aren't original.
No.
But it does mean that, like, your new favorite punk band, maybe they're not producing music anymore. You've then got 40 years of punk music to go and investigate, from the 70s onwards.
Yeah.
So I guess that's good. It's nothing to do with fungi, but, outside of that.
Outside of that, because now I know you enjoy what you do. That's why you already mentioned about, because you focus on everything. Yeah. And then there were a couple of people and a couple of shows that influenced you a lot when you were a kid and everything. When I was playing marble, you were doing academic.
Look, I was. What I find is it's the Marvel series of movies was very handy because it gave me a cultural reference point when I was talking to students.
Okay.
Because sometimes when you're developing a teaching, what you want to do is use a common metaphor or a common image or some frame that most people will understand. And they were really handy for years. I remember there was one example from Twilight. In the first Twilight movie, the protagonist vampire says that he was turned into a vampire during the Spanish flu, which is a really good way to talk about pandemics. And at the early point when I was here in like 2012, that was the only pandemic, the Spanish flu, that we really had as a reference point. And so that was useful because a lot of students at that time had watched Twilight and it was still fresh in the memory, and then it was gone. Suddenly it's like only one person knows about it.
Yeah.
And, one of my colleagues said he referred to The Matrix, the first movie, and he knew he'd gotten old when nobody, other than a couple of clear nerds, really had heard of it. And so that's how you know you're getting old, when, your cultural references are aging with.
Yeah, now the things are changing so rapidly nowadays. You talk about, let's say, the Keanu Reeves movie, right?
Yeah.
The one you talk about that 6 months ago, and then now it might be something else. Now everybody's talking about the wedding in India. Have you heard about that?
I heard there was a lot of famous people going to a very big event.
That's like, I think, one of the biggest wedding in the world, I guess.
Okay.
I think he's
okay.
So he's his name is Mukesh Ambani.
Okay.
So they do have this telecom network, right? So he's worth, I
don't know if it's that big because I wasn't invited.
Yeah, fair enough. Neither me. Neither.
Yeah.
So he had a lot of people, like a lot. And Indian weddings, if you happen to know,
they're usually very big.
Yeah, and they last for like a week. So they do have a rituals where they do it. But anyways, and then it was on the news as well. The channel 9 or 7.
That's how I heard about it.
Yeah, and then I was like, Okay, so the Australia is also interested in.
Yeah.
Come on, he has each and every people. Not everybody went there, but famous people in the world. So now it keeps on changing. That's the pattern. That's how the world works.
Yeah. But money is pretty consistent in those events.
It's all about business as well. If it's a business mind,
Yeah,
you never
well,
know.
well,
It's all.
Why do people start businesses? Because they want to make money.
It's
At
all
the end of the day.
Exactly. That's right. It's totally different. I didn't plan to ask you these things, but you are a scientist.
Yep.
Just I don't know what are your personal things. What do you think about spirituality?
Well, I guess growing up in Ireland, I was originally would have been brought up in a Catholic household, so it would have been quite traditional. I think in the early 80s, late 70s in Ireland, it was still quite Catholic. People went to church. People took it seriously. Priests were important members of the community. Even teachers, doctors were all. It was a different time. As I grew up, I became less convinced by the. I think the problem is when people try to tie up a kind of literal need for there to be a God with the kind of philosophical, spiritual element of it became difficult. And so you can never really get rid of your upbringing. So I'd say most of my principles, etc., would be from that upbringing, but I wouldn't cleave towards having a belief in a specific God.
Okay.
Like that there's something that's able to have control or plan your life or know what you're doing specifically, etc. So I wouldn't cleave towards that. But I think a lot of the philosophies embedded within religions are fairly sensible. And you do need a way to navigate through a life living with other people. And that's where I think that becomes really useful. I think also it's totally fine if you're strongly spiritual and you take your faith very seriously. But just know it's probably not literally true. But that's fine. I mean, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, exactly. Because why I wanted to ask you, because you as a scientist, you are completely unique. You do everything thorough research, and you do spend a lot of time researching, and your papers, your findings are based upon the fact and the true events, and you use a lot of data. That's why I wanted to ask how.
So that's tends to be the kind of a defining issue sometimes is a separation between religion and science. It's perfectly fine to have spirituality. I don't think that's connected. But if you're trying to literally understand what the table's made from, or understand how fungi live in the environment and then cause infection, you don't find those answers in spirituality or in religious books or texts, right? Because they're largely works of inspiration, not based on actually going out and doing things. And so, and I think it makes a mockery as well of religion to say that, imagine someone in a lab flicking through a Bible trying to make penicillin. It's just, it doesn't do anyone a service. So I think you have to understand that these are separate things. Like there is how the universe is constructed, there is how people are made, etc. Like you can only study that through scientific method really to understand it. How people interact with each other is not really what we work with in science. How do you live the good life? I don't think that's necessarily like you can do studies and go, right, these people live this way, these people live that way, right? What do we think is having better outcomes? But that's not really what what we do as scientists. What is a moral life? These are philosophical questions. I like to think of religion as being in more of that philosophical space. If you try to mix the two of them, you're going to end up in a bad space because they're not particularly compatible. But also dealing with different questions. So you're dealing with the physical reality of what's in front of you, as opposed to what is your brain, what games is your brain playing with you? How are you going to live a good life? How are you going to teach your children to live a good life? Where are you going to get consistent set of values that will give you a set of laws that are fair and that people can live by? And so I think through a lot of religion, it's a lot of wisdom that is developed, gets distilled into that. And so you can see a lot of the time, even in different parts of the world at different times, most people are not fond on killing your family. Like, that's frowned upon. Most people have figured out that's bad, right? So if you can construct philosophies, and maybe there was a time when you needed an external God to give you the authority to speak to those values. But I don't think that's necessary. I think if you want to follow a way of life that works for you, that's not harming other people, that's your choice. But it's impossible to argue these are those questions. Does God exist? There's no way to study that.
Exactly right.
It's like saying, where did life come from? That's very difficult.
I was about to ask.
That is very difficult to study as well.
I was about to ask you, what are your thoughts on all the theories that's out there?
There's a lot, right? There's a few, but I'd say, so as a scientist, you deal with what you can look at. And so let's say biological evolution, it happens, right? If you look at how DNA works, if you have a deep understanding of that, you can see how that will work. Abiogenesis is where you get life, a situation where today there's no life, tomorrow there's life. There's no coherent mechanism. Now, there are experiments that show that you can start making some of the building blocks of life through chemical reactions that have nothing living. And actually, they have done experiments to show that ribonucleic acid can form independent of a biological system. And RNA is known to be the first nucleic acid. And it can actually have catalytic properties as well. How you get from there to an actual functional cell is a very, nobody quite knows that. Whether or not anyone will ever know that, barring a time machine. But I think that's a difference. I'm a very applied, practical scientist. I don't deal with, let's say, hypotheticals in what I work with. We'll have a hypothesis, which is trying to explain, but it's explaining the observable. And that's usually where we're strongest. You can put together experiments and try to recreate conditions, but trying to look at something so long ago, we would have to probably see it in action somewhere to really understand it, whether or not we will ever see the beginnings of life happening on another planet. We will never know. I definitely don't subscribe to trying to, because we can't explain it, that's where supernatural explanations are required. Also, I don't think it's that important. Because I'm more about, well, let's deal with what's in front of us. That's, where did life come from? Predates everything we live with. I sometimes think those questions like, oh, what happens in a black hole? That's not that important in your daily life. So microbiologists, we deal at a certain scale.
Growing up, I had a major in physics.
Oh, yeah.
So a black hole was quite fascinating thing for me.
No, they're interesting.
And then and then I realized a little bit later, there's not much research going on. So you don't exactly know what. Like, we know it's a black hole because it's a deity star, right? And then there's a lot of, growing up, there was a big thing. And then a little bit, like, I think, let's say a couple of years later, I was like, forget about it. There might be some other stuff.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is work on them, and that they've been able to visualize them a bit. But look, that's not going to make your life better tomorrow.
Exactly.
It's not going to have no effect on your lifetime. Again, it's like, when will the sun consume the earth? Well, it's not a problem you need to worry about. Maybe it's better to figure out pollution. Let's work with things that are important here and now. So I think those are, again, like, where did life come from? That is a fun conversation with a beer.
Yeah, exactly.
And some people devote their lives to those studies, but it's more esoteric than practical or going to give you a definitive answer. And I think a lot of people like having conversations where there can be multiple explanations, where there's gray areas, that creates really interesting debate, gives people stuff to argue about. But as a scientist, that's not where I live my life.
Yeah, no, 100%. Sometimes the clips pops up on my feed and everything. Like, I think 6 or 7 months ago, I was watching something anyway, but it just popped up. Like, this person was saying, we all human beings, whatever we are doing, it might be like, it's just we are made to do those things, and some external force or something, it might be just we are made to do it. We are just doing it unknowingly. You know what I mean? We are doing it, we think we know it, but we are made to do it, like those things. And it's good to just listen what they are saying and just keep moving on. That's what it is.
Yeah. Look, ideas are good. Conversations are good. Are there, like, sometimes you just have to ask yourself, like, you might call it the big question, was it an important question? Like, is that? Probably not. I guess if you're being very utilitarian, and I sort of am, but yeah, I would rarely concern myself with those types of questions.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. As you said, it's a Friday night with a long neck on the hand, then you can just. It's good to talk, but same.
Yeah, so it's not something I would want to devote my professional life to, because I think there's important practical considerations. And that's not the type of science, that's not the type of thing I grew up wanting to do science for. I want to do experiments. I want to, at one point I wanted to go swimming with sharks. Then I got older and realized that was a terrible idea and started working on, fungi. Not that I have a clue how that happened.
Yeah.
That wasn't really in the plan, but, you discover things as you grow up. You learn new things and you go, oh, that's fascinating.
Are you doing any more experiments? Or?
Yeah, well, I personally don't get a lot of time, but that's why we have PhD students and master's students to go in the lab and to do experiments. I think it's one of the frustrations of a life in science is we've often with colleagues, we've likened it to having like a sports career. You have your playing days, which is where you're actively doing experiments and research, but then obviously your knees go. And then you become a coach. Yeah. And it's a little bit like that for scientists. There's those, 20s and into the 30s where you're doing experiments, you're building your kind of your name to a certain extent and building your portfolio of work. But then even if you're in a research institute, then your time goes to really more management of scientists and helping to manage the department you're in, or you're exclusively writing articles or funding proposals or dealing with particular, let's say funding bodies or professional bodies. There's just a lot of admin comes on. So yeah, as a frustration, nobody gets into science because they're really excited about paperwork, but that's where you end up. I mean, it's important to do, but if someone could have said I could have spent my life in the lab doing experiments, that would have been great. Because that's, doing science is very much a doing and active thing. But I think even Alex Ferguson said the best thing about soccer is playing. But, but still being involved in the game. Yeah. Because, when your playing days are over, there's no substitute. So there are opportunities occasionally when I can get into the lab. It's, the best time. but mostly I just manage people who are doing experiments and, help them to become new, happy scientists.
Yeah.
And teaching the new generation as well.
Mm.
So you just have to be pretty focused on what your job description is.
Any advice you want to give to inspiring scientists who want to become scientists, or they are just starting out in the science field?
Be patient. Be determined.
Mm.
Don't be put off. It's not always easy. And one of the things that can be a frustration is that what you're very passionate about may not be funded where you live. Be prepared to move if that's what it requires. Getting out, seeing the world, living different places, working in different labs, maybe having different experiences is really good. Like there's a living part of life as well, outside of experiments, outside of labs, outside of whatever discipline you're doing. And if you can travel the world being a scientist before you have any strong tied down commitments, that's great. But yeah, it does require a bit of determination, no matter in what discipline or field you're in. Perseverance is important.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's going to be bad days. Not every day is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
You can't have cake for dinner every day.
Nah, probably end up with diabetes.
I have tried to have cake for dinner every day, but it's been,
It's not a lot of sugar. Everything has to be balanced.
Yes.
And discipline and consistent with what you're doing.
One of my professors gave us some advice when I was in my first or second year of university, which is if you like what you're doing, then that will give you the motivation to be good at it. If you get good at it, you should be successful.
Mm.
So that really is follow your passion, work hard at it, and, but be prepared that it's not always going to be a straight path. So, with a bit of sense, but definitely try to do the thing that really inspires you, because that will then give you the motivation to get good at it. Somehow learning the flute might not be inspirational to a lot of people, whereas they all want to play guitar, right? There may be, but yeah, I mean, I didn't do exactly the type of science I kind of grew up thinking I would do. But you learn more, and the more you learn, the more you know, the more you realize that there's a whole different, almost universe out there. When I discovered microbes, I was like, oh my, I didn't know this stuff. And then you can spend your life trying to know more about it. And so it doesn't work out for everyone. But if you don't give it a go,
you'll never know.
You'll never know.
Wow, it was nice. Wow, finally we did it. Finally we did it, isn't it? And thank you, Dr. Charles.
Yeah.
For being here. I know you are very busy. It's hard. We only say hi, hello about you. And despite of your busy schedule, you get time to.
But no, it's good to sit down, but we'll have to just do it when we're not on camera as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully you got some sound bites out of this.
Yeah. Nah, it was good. Thank you all for tuning in. Amazing conversation with, again, Dr. Charles, and really appreciate you coming out.
Okay, yeah. Thanks.
If you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. Until then, your host, Sarah Batra, signing off.